My name is Ethan, and for 13 years, I lived inside a house that never completely felt like mine. That realization didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, quietly, like water finding cracks in a foundation.
At first, I ignored it. Then I explained it away. Eventually, I built entire stories to protect myself from it. That's what people do when the truth is too expensive to face. They bargain with it, they soften it. They tell themselves, tomorrow will be different. I told myself that for years. When I married Rachel, I wasn't just marrying a woman. I was stepping into a life that already existed. Tyler was 9, Mason was 7. Two boys carrying another man's last name, another man's blood, another man's history. Their father wasn't dead. That would have been easier. No, he was alive, just absent. A ghost who drifted in and out whenever it suited him. Sometimes he appeared on birthdays with expensive gifts and dramatic promises. Sometimes he vanished for months without a phone call. But no matter how long he disappeared, he remained their father. I learned that lesson early. A biological father can fail 1,000 times and still keep a place in a child's heart. A stepfather can spend decades doing everything right and still remain a guest. I didn't understand that back then. Back then, I believed effort mattered. I believed consistency mattered. I believed love could build bridges stronger than blood. God, I was naive. The first few years weren't terrible. Difficult, yes. Awkward, absolutely. But not terrible. The boys were young enough to accept rides to school, young enough to ask for help with homework, young enough to let me teach them how to throw a baseball or ride a bicycle. There were moments when I thought we were becoming something real, a family. Not perfect, but real. I remember standing behind Mason while he learned to ride without training wheels. He crashed into a mailbox 3 separate times. The fourth time, he stayed upright. The grin on his face stretched from ear to ear. I remember Tyler calling me from school because he'd forgotten a science project at home. I left work early and drove across town to bring it to him. The relief in his eyes made the inconvenience disappear. Moments like that gave me hope. Dangerous hope. The kind that convinces a man he's building something permanent. Years passed. The boys grew taller, their voices deepened, their interests changed. Life became more expensive, and somehow, without anyone officially discussing it, I became responsible for almost everything. I paid for football camps. I paid for school trips. I paid for braces. I paid for phones. I paid for laptops. I paid for car insurance. I paid for countless invisible things nobody remembers because they only become visible when they're missing. Nobody ever sat me down and asked. It simply happened. One bill at a time. One responsibility at a time. One sacrifice at a time. Like bricks being stacked onto someone's shoulders. At first, you barely notice. Then one day you realize you're carrying an entire building. Rachel worked hard. I'll give her that. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't cruel. But she became comfortable. Comfortable with my reliability. Comfortable with my willingness to solve problems. Comfortable with knowing that no matter what happened, Ethan would handle it. The boys became comfortable too. They never had to think about who paid for things. Why would they? Electricity worked, internet worked, phones worked, cars worked. The refrigerator stayed full. The mortgage got paid. The world functioned. That's the curse of being dependable. People stop seeing your effort. They only notice your absence. For years, I convinced myself that was enough. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need gratitude. I didn't need Father's Day cards. I didn't need titles. At least that's what I told myself. But every man lies to himself eventually. The truth was uglier. I wanted respect, not worship, not admiration, just respect. I wanted the boys to understand that somebody had spent years carrying weight so they wouldn't have to. I wanted Rachel to defend me when necessary. I wanted to feel like I belonged. Nothing more, nothing less. Instead, I slowly became part of the furniture. Useful, reliable, forgettable. The signs were everywhere. Tyler introduced me as my mom's husband. Never Ethan, never stepdad, never anything that suggested connection. Just a title, a description, a piece of information. Mason wasn't much different. Whenever friends visited, I became invisible. A background figure moving through rooms I paid for. A wallet with legs. A maintenance worker who happened to live in the house. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But pain becomes easier to tolerate when you experience it gradually. You adapt. You normalize it. You convince yourself things will improve. And for a long time, I genuinely believed they would. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. The day started normally, which is the strange thing about disasters. They rarely announce themselves. The morning was ordinary. Work was ordinary. Traffic was ordinary. Even dinner felt ordinary. Rachel made pasta. The television played softly in the living room. Rain tapped against the windows. Nothing felt important. Nothing felt dangerous. Tyler arrived home late. Again, it had become a pattern. Curfews meant less and less to him. Responsibilities meant less and less too. Mason wasn't much better. Simple household chores required constant reminders. The smallest request became a negotiation. By dinner, frustration had been building for weeks, maybe months. Nobody acknowledged it. Nobody addressed it. We simply carried it to the table like another dish. I remember watching Tyler scroll through his phone while eating. Rachel noticed, said nothing. Mason left his plate in the sink. Rachel noticed, said nothing. Small things, tiny things. But houses don't collapse because of one crack. They collapse because thousands of cracks are ignored. Eventually, dinner ended. I should have let it go, I know that now. But some part of me still believed I had the right to act like a parent. So I spoke. Tyler, he didn't look up. Yeah? You missed curfew again Saturday. His eyes rolled immediately. The reaction irritated me more than the violation. We've talked about this. We? The word landed strangely. I ignored it. You came home nearly 2 hours late. I got home. That's not the point. He laughed. Actually laughed. Across the table, Mason smirked. My stomach tightened. Rachel stood near the counter drying dishes, watching, listening, silent. The boys sensed it. Teenagers always know where the boundaries are. They know exactly how far they can push before consequences appear. The problem was that consequences had stopped appearing a long time ago. I was the only one still pretending they existed. You have responsibilities, I said. Tyler leaned back. And? And rules matter. Why? The answer should have been obvious. Instead, I found myself searching for words. A strange thing, trying to explain authority to someone who no longer believes you possess any. Then Tyler looked at Mason. Mason looked back. A silent exchange, a shared joke. And suddenly I understood something terrible. This conversation wasn't serious to them. I was serious. They weren't. I was trying to be a parent. They were watching a performance. Then Tyler smiled. Not a happy smile, not even an angry one. The kind of smile people wear before they deliberately hurt someone. And then he said it. You didn't raise us. The room froze. My heartbeat seemed louder than the rain outside. Tyler continued. So quit acting like our dad. Mason laughed immediately. Seriously. The sound echoed through the kitchen. Sharp, ugly, final. I looked at Rachel, waiting, hoping, needing. Just one sentence, one correction. One defense. One acknowledgement that 13 years had meant something. Anything. Instead, she stood there holding a dish towel, silent, completely silent. And in that moment, I understood something far more painful than the boy's words. The silence was agreement. Maybe not intentional, maybe not malicious, but agreement nonetheless. Because when someone attacks a person you love and you say nothing, your silence chooses a side. Rachel chose hers. The boys kept smiling, waiting for my reaction, waiting for an argument, waiting for a fight. Instead, I felt something inside me go cold. Not angry, not emotional, cold. Like a door quietly locking. Like a bridge collapsing into darkness. Like the end of a long illusion. I nodded once, just once. Then I stood. Ethan, Rachel finally said. Too late. Much too late. I looked around the kitchen, at the lights, the appliances, the phones charging on the counter, the internet router blinking in the corner, the comfortable house, the comfortable lives. And for the first time, I saw all of it differently. Not as a family, as transactions. Years of transactions, years of giving, years of carrying, years of pain. For people who still viewed me as an outsider. I smiled. A small smile. The kind that appears when a man finally stops arguing with reality. It's okay, I said. And for the first time in 13 years, I meant it. Because something had ended. The boys thought they had won an argument. What they didn't realize was that they had just ended a contract. And contracts, once broken, are very difficult to rebuild. I walked toward my office, closed the door, sat in the dark, and began thinking about every single thing I had been paying for. One by one, very carefully, very calmly. No anger, no tears, just clarity. The most dangerous thing a man can finally possess. That night, I did not sleep. I lay beside Rachel in the dark, staring at the ceiling while her breathing settled into that careful rhythm people use when they are pretending to be asleep. She knew. Of course she knew. Silence has a sound when guilt is inside it. I could feel her awake beside me, rigid under the blankets, waiting for me to speak first, waiting for me to make it easier, waiting for me to become the man I had always been, the one who swallowed pain, the one who apologized for being wounded, the one who repaired the house after everyone else set fire to it. But I said nothing, not one word, because there are moments in a man's life when language becomes useless. I had spent 13 years explaining myself through action, through labor, through money, through presence, through every quiet sacrifice that had disappeared into that house like rain into dry soil. And still, when the truth came, I was not family. So I decided to believe them. By morning, something in me had settled. Rachel made coffee like nothing had happened. Tyler came downstairs wearing headphones. Mason grabbed a protein bar and left the wrapper on the counter. Normal. Everything was normal. That was the insult. They had broken something sacred and expected breakfast to continue. I watched Tyler open the refrigerator without looking at me. Mason asked Rachel where his hoodie was. Rachel answered softly. Nobody mentioned the night before. Nobody apologized. Nobody even looked ashamed. So I drank my coffee in silence and understood the shape of my new life. I would not yell. I would not lecture. I would not beg for respect from boys who had been taught my dignity was optional. I would simply stop. That morning after they left, I went into my office and opened my laptop. The room was dim, rain clouds pressed against the windows. My desk was covered with receipts, account statements, repair invoices, insurance notices, evidence. A paper trail of a man who had mistaken responsibility for belonging. I started with the phones. 3 extra lines, Tyler's, Mason's, Rachel's upgraded plan too, though hers I left alone for the moment. The boys had unlimited data, because Tyler said he needed it for school and Mason said all his friends had it. They had new devices every couple of years because I had quietly absorbed the payments. Screen protection, insurance, cloud storage, small things, always small things. That is how families drain you. Not with one wound, with 1,000 cuts. I downgraded the plan, removed the extras, canceled the device protection. Then I moved to streaming services, movies, music, gaming subscriptions, sports packages, premium channels nobody admitted they used, but everyone complained about when they buffered. Gone. Then the gaming memberships. Gone. Then the automatic deposits into their spending cards. Gone. I paused when I reached Tyler's car insurance. My hand hovered over the mouse. I remembered teaching him to drive in an empty church parking lot. His hands had gripped the wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He had snapped at me twice. I had stayed calm. I told him pressure was normal. I told him confidence came slowly. I remembered the day he passed his test. He did not hug me. He called Rachel first. Still, I had smiled like an idiot. I left the insurance active, for now. I was angry, not reckless. But everything extra disappeared, one by one. Click, cancel, confirm. It should have felt satisfying. It didn't. It felt like burying someone. Not them, me, the man I had been, the fool who believed that love, if given long enough, would eventually be returned in some recognizable form. For the first week, nothing happened. That almost made it worse. The house moved on without noticing my absence because my absence had not yet become inconvenient. Tyler still came home late. Mason still left dishes wherever he pleased. Rachel still moved through the rooms with that nervous softness, glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. I kept to myself. I fixed nothing unless it directly affected me. The loose cabinet handle in the kitchen stayed loose. The garage door sensor kept blinking. The upstairs bathroom faucet kept dripping into the sink, each drop tapping like a clock, counting down to something none of them understood yet. At dinner, I spoke only when necessary. Rachel tried small talk. I answered politely. The boys barely noticed. That was the strange mercy of being invisible. You can disappear before anyone realizes you are gone. Then the first crack appeared. It was Mason. Of course it was Mason. He came downstairs holding his phone in front of him like it had betrayed him. "Mom, my data isn't working." Rachel looked up from the stove. "What do you mean?" "It's slow, like really slow." Tyler snorted from the table. "Use Wi-Fi, genius." "I am using Wi-Fi." "No, you're not." "Yes, I am." They argued for a moment, sharp and pointless. I sat at the table with my coffee and said nothing. Rachel glanced at me. Just once, a quick look. A question she did not want to ask. I lowered my eyes to the newspaper. Mason groaned. "This house internet sucks now." It did, because I had downgraded it. Not enough to make it unusable, just enough to remove luxury. There is a difference between need and comfort. They were about to learn it. The next day, Tyler complained that one of his streaming apps had logged him out. Mason said his gaming account required renewal. Rachel muttered something about checking passwords later. I said nothing. Silence was becoming my language. By Friday, Tyler's phone service had reduced to basic access. No endless data, no premium features, no invisible cushion beneath his habits. He slammed his phone onto the kitchen counter. "What the hell is wrong with everything this week?" Rachel flinched. "Don't swear." He ignored her. "It's like all the accounts are messed up." Mason looked at me then, really looked. Not with respect, with suspicion. I held his gaze, calmly. He looked away first. Good. Small victories are still victories. Rachel followed me into the hallway later that evening. "Ethan," I stopped. Her voice was quiet. "Did you change something with the internet?" I turned slowly. She looked tired, beautiful still, in the way familiar people remain beautiful even after they have disappointed you beyond repair. "Yes." Her brow tightened. "Why?" "Because we didn't need the expensive plan. The boys use it for school. They have access. You know what I mean." I did. She meant comfort. She meant convenience. She meant the life I had funded so thoroughly that nobody could tell where necessity ended and entitlement began. I looked at her for a long moment. "No, Rachel, I don't think I do." Her lips parted. Nothing came out. Again, that same silence, always arriving when I needed courage from her. I walked away before bitterness became words. The bills came next. Not the major ones at first, small notices. An automatic payment for Mason's private training program failed. A gaming renewal declined. Tyler's roadside assistance expired. A cloud storage account sent warnings about reduced space. Tiny alarms ringing throughout the structure of their lives. They treated each one as a technical mistake. That was almost funny, almost, because people who never pay for anything rarely understand how payment works. They assume comfort is natural, like air, like sunlight, like a mother's forgiveness, like a stepfather's wallet. A week later, Rachel found the first serious notice. I came home from work and saw her sitting at the kitchen table with envelopes spread before her. Her face had gone pale. Tyler and Mason were upstairs. Music thudded faintly through the ceiling. Rachel looked up at me. "What is this?" I set my keys in the bowl by the door. "What is what?" "These bills." I walked closer. Electric, water, insurance, internet. Several accounts I had paid for years without discussion because it was easier than fighting about responsibility. "They look like bills." Her eyes sharpened. "Don't do that." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because after 13 years of being expected to absorb everything quietly, my refusal to perform confusion offended her. "These were coming out of your account," she said. "Yes." "For how long?" "A long time." "How long, Ethan?" I looked at the envelopes, then at her. "Years." Her face changed, not guilt exactly, shock, as if she had discovered a room in her own house she never knew existed. "You never told me." "I never hid it." "That's not the same thing." "No," I said, "it isn't." She pressed her fingers to her forehead. "I thought we were splitting things." "We were, on paper." Her eyes glistened. "Why would you let me think that?" That question did something ugly inside me. Let her think? As though I had manipulated her with my generosity. As though the years of quiet coverage were a trick. As though sacrifice became deceit when the recipient finally saw the receipt. I leaned against the counter. Because every time something came up, Rachel, someone had to handle it. And most of the time, that someone was me. She looked down. Good. Let her look. Let her see the numbers. Let numbers explain what my heart never could. That night, the boys complained through dinner, internet, phones, subscriptions. Tyler said he could barely use maps on the road without data. Mason said his friends were laughing because his gaming account had lapsed. I listened, chewed slowly, said nothing. Finally, Tyler snapped, "Are you just going to sit there?" I looked at him. "Yes." He blinked. "What's your problem?" Rachel stiffened. Mason muttered, "Here we go." I set my fork down, quietly. The room tightened. I could feel them all preparing for the old version of me. The man who explained, the man who argued, the man who tried to prove his love in words they could twist. But that man was gone. "My problem," I said, "is that I spent years paying for things no one respected." Tyler scoffed. "Oh my God." Mason leaned back. "It's about that again?" That. One sentence. One humiliation. One evening where their mother watched me get erased. To them, it was already history. To me, it was the moment the mask came off. Rachel whispered, "Boys." Too soft. Always too soft. I stood. "I'm not discussing it." Tyler's face hardened. "So you're punishing us?" "No." "Then what do you call this?" I looked at him for a long second. "Believing you." He frowned. "What?" "You said I didn't raise you. You told me to stop acting like your dad." So I stopped. The silence that followed was not empty this time. It was afraid. Mason looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at the bills. Tyler looked at me like he was finally seeing a locked door where a hallway used to be. I left them there. The next morning, the electricity went out. Only for a few hours. Long enough. Rachel had missed a transfer arrangement she didn't even know existed until it failed. The utility company didn't care about blended family politics. It didn't care about teenage cruelty. It didn't care about silent wives or wounded stepfathers. It cared about payment. The house went dark just after sunset. 1 second, light. The next, black. Mason cursed upstairs. Tyler shouted from his room. Rachel stood in the hallway with her phone flashlight shaking in her hand. I was in the living room when they gathered there, all three of them, confused and angry and suddenly smaller than they had seen before. The router was dead. The television was dead. The refrigerator hummed no more. The comfortable machine had stopped. Mason's voice cracked first. "Mom, what happened?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. She looked at me. I looked back. And for once, I did not rescue her from the truth. She swallowed. "A bill wasn't paid." Tyler frowned. "What bill?" "The electric bill." "How does that even happen?" There it was, the innocence of the spoiled. Not evil, not stupid, just untouched by consequence. Rachel closed her eyes. "Because your stepfather was paying more than any of us realized." No one spoke. Not even Tyler. The darkness did what my words never could. It made them listen. I sat in my chair, hands folded, watching the family I had carried finally feel the weight of its own body. No screaming, no lecture, no triumph, just darkness, and the first quiet sound of reality entering the room. The darkness lasted only 3 hours. 3 hours. That was all it took for 13 years of invisible work to become visible. Funny, isn't it? People can ignore your sacrifices for over a decade, but the moment the lights stop turning on, suddenly everyone becomes interested in how the house functions. I sat in the living room while Rachel made phone calls. The glow from her phone illuminated her face in brief flashes. Every few seconds, another automated system placed her on hold. Another representative transferred her to another department. Another explanation had to be repeated. The boys remained unusually quiet. No television, no gaming systems, no streaming services, no endless distractions. Just silence. Raw silence. The kind that forces people to sit alone with their thoughts. I wondered if they were thinking about what they had said. I doubted it, at least not yet. Most people don't understand consequences when they first arrive. They only understand inconvenience. Consequences require reflection, and reflection takes time. The electricity eventually returned. The refrigerator hummed back to life. The lights blinked on. The router reconnected. The house breathed again. But something had changed. I could see it in Rachel's eyes. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Not about me, about reality. For years, she had lived inside a structure she didn't fully understand. A structure built on automatic payments, silent repairs, hidden responsibilities, and countless decisions she never needed to make because I had already made them. Now she was seeing the machinery, and she didn't like what she saw. The next morning, I left for work before sunrise. When I returned that evening, Rachel was sitting at the dining room table surrounded by papers. Dozens of them. Bills, statements, insurance documents, account summaries, expense reports. The sight almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because I had sat in that exact position hundreds of times, alone, managing numbers nobody else wanted to see. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back carelessly, reading glasses resting low on her nose. She looked up as I entered. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she asked a question, a simple question, one that should have been asked years ago. How much? I set down my briefcase. How much what? How much were you covering? The room felt strangely still. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, took my time, then answered, a lot. Her eyes narrowed. Ethan, I sighed, not dramatically, just tired. Tens of thousands over the years. Her face went pale. I continued, phones, internet, insurance, vehicle expenses, sports fees, school costs, memberships, repairs, utility gaps, medical deductibles, emergency expenses. Each item seemed to strike her physically, like stones, like proof. Because that's what numbers become when they've been ignored long enough. Proof. You never told me. There it was again, that phrase. I turned toward her. I didn't hide anything. You should have said something. Would it have changed anything? She opened her mouth, stopped, looked down. Exactly. We both knew the answer. No, it wouldn't have changed anything. Because whenever a problem appeared, everyone assumed I would handle it, including me, especially me. That had been my greatest mistake. Not their entitlement, my participation in it. The realization settled over me like cold rain. For years I had blamed them, the boys, Rachel, their father, everyone. But the truth was more uncomfortable. I had volunteered. Nobody forced me. Nobody held a gun to my head. I chose responsibility over confrontation, again and again and again, until it became expected. That realization didn't make me forgive them, but it did make me understand something. People rarely value what arrives without resistance. Rachel spent the next week trying to prove something. I could see it. She never said it aloud, but I recognized the determination. She wanted to prove the family could function without me. Not because she hated me, because she needed to believe it. The alternative was too frightening. If I truly had been holding everything together, then the entire foundation of their lives was more fragile than they wanted to admit. So she picked up extra shifts, made more phone calls, created spreadsheets, built budgets, negotiated payment plans, worked late, came home exhausted, then stayed awake balancing numbers. I watched from a distance, not cruelly, not happily, just observing. The way a man watches someone learn a lesson he already knows. Every week produced another surprise. The boys' activities cost more than expected. Insurance premiums increased. Vehicle maintenance appeared. School expenses emerged from nowhere. A leaking pipe required repair. A broken appliance needed replacement. The list never ended, because adulthood never ends. Responsibility never ends. Somebody always pays. The only question is, who? For 13 years, the answer had been me. Now Rachel was discovering exactly what that meant. One Friday evening, I came home to find her crying, not loudly, quietly, at the kitchen table. The same kitchen table where the boys had laughed at me. The same kitchen table where 13 years had been dismissed with a sentence. I stopped in the doorway. She quickly wiped her eyes, tried to compose herself, failed. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. What happened? She laughed bitterly, a broken sound. Everything. Then she gestured toward the papers. Every time I think I've figured it out, something else appears. I looked at the bills, the overdue notices, the payment arrangements, the calculations, the impossible math. And suddenly I remembered doing the exact same thing years earlier, alone, late at night, making sure nobody else felt the pressure, protecting everyone from the reality of their own lives. Rachel followed my gaze. I didn't know. 3 words, simple, honest, painfully late. I nodded, nothing more, because what was there to say? Knowledge changes people, but it doesn't erase history. The boys changed too, slowly, reluctantly. At first, they remained angry. Anger is easier than reflection. Anger allows you to remain the victim. Reflection forces you to acknowledge your role. Tyler spent the first weeks blaming me. Everything became my fault. The internet, the bills, the stress, the arguments, the tension, all of it. I expected that. It's easier to blame the man who stopped carrying you than the one who carried you for years. But reality is persistent. Reality wears people down. One evening I came home and found Tyler trying to fix a lawnmower. The machine sat disassembled in the garage, tools scattered everywhere. His frustration was obvious. I watched silently for several minutes. He struggled, failed, started again, failed again. Eventually he noticed me standing there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he muttered something unexpected. "I can't figure it out." Not an apology, not gratitude, but something close to humility, a rare thing. I looked at the mower, saw the problem immediately. Years of fixing everything had made mechanical issues almost instinctive. I could have solved it in 30 seconds. Instead, I folded my arms, waited. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, then finally asked, "Can you show me?" Can you show me? Not fix it. Show me. Small difference, important difference. I walked over, pointed to the disconnected component, explained the issue. Nothing more. 5 minutes later, the mower started. The engine roared to life. Tyler stared at it, then at me. Something passed through his expression, confusion, recognition, maybe both. For the first time, I think he understood that useful things don't simply exist. Someone learns them, someone builds them, someone maintains them, someone carries the knowledge. And for most of his life, that someone had been me. Mason changed differently, quieter, more internal. He started noticing things. The rides I used to provide, the repairs I used to make, the errands I used to run. The countless invisible interventions that had prevented problems before they appeared. One night I overheard him asking Rachel why the sink still leaked. The question almost made me smile, because for years, sinks simply stopped leaking. Doors simply got fixed. Problems simply disappeared. Magic. That's what responsibility looks like to people who never perform it. Magic. Rachel answered honestly. Because Ethan isn't fixing everything anymore. Silence followed. Heavy silence, thoughtful silence. Good. Let them think. Let them finally see the machine behind the curtain. Weeks passed. The atmosphere inside the house changed. The boys laughed less, complained less, demanded less. Not because they had matured overnight, because exhaustion was teaching them, because pressure was teaching them, because reality was teaching them. Lessons people refuse to learn through gratitude often arrive through loss. I watched it happen, day by day, like water wearing down stone. One evening I came downstairs after midnight and saw Rachel asleep at the dining room table, a calculator beside her, bills spread across the surface, one hand still holding a pen. The sight stopped me. For a moment I simply stood there, looking, remembering. I had fallen asleep in that exact position countless times. After overtime shifts, after unexpected expenses, after emergencies, after carrying burdens nobody noticed. The difference was that nobody had ever found me there. Nobody had ever seen it. The boys certainly hadn't. They had slept peacefully while I sat exactly where Rachel sat now, protecting them from knowledge, protecting them from consequences, protecting them from adulthood. I quietly picked up a blanket, draped it over her shoulders, then walked away. She never knew. Old habits die slowly, even when love does. The following week, I overheard something that surprised me. Tyler and Mason were talking in the living room. They thought I was upstairs. I wasn't. I stood in the hallway listening, not intentionally, at first, then I couldn't stop. "Did you know he paid for all that stuff?" Mason asked. Tyler didn't answer immediately. "No, me neither." A pause. Then Mason spoke again. "We kind of treated him like crap." The words hung in the air, heavy, uncomfortable, real. Tyler stared at the floor. I could see him through the doorway. His expression looked older somehow. "We didn't think about it." No, they hadn't. That was the entire problem. Nobody had thought about it. Not for 13 years. And now, finally, they were beginning to. The realization had started. The lesson had begun. But some lessons arrived too late to save what they damaged. And deep down, I already knew this one would be no different. The strange thing about regret is that it rarely arrives when it should. It doesn't appear during the moment of betrayal. It doesn't stop the cruel sentence before it leaves someone's mouth. It doesn't interrupt the laughter. It doesn't defend the person being wounded. No, regret arrives afterward, when the damage is already done, when consequences have settled into the walls, when the bridge is already in the river. That was what I watched happen over the following months. Not dramatically, not all at once, slowly, painfully, like winter settling over a landscape. The house felt different now, quieter, more careful. Even the arguments sounded different. Before, every disagreement had carried confidence, the confidence of people who assumed stability was permanent. That confidence was gone. Now every discussion seemed to circle around money, bills, repairs, payments, schedules, sacrifices, real life. The things I had spent years managing in the background. The things nobody respected because nobody had ever been forced to notice them. One evening I came home from work and found Rachel sitting alone on the back patio. The sun was setting. Orange light stretched across the yard. The air carried the first hint of autumn. She looked tired, not physically, spiritually, like someone who had finally discovered the actual weight of the life she was living. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us had become familiar, not hostile, just honest. Finally, she said something. I understand now. I looked at her. She stared into the distance. I didn't before. I waited. She continued, I thought you were helping. The words almost made me laugh. Helping, such a small word, such a gentle word, as if I had occasionally carried groceries, as if I had simply contributed here and there. I remained silent. Rachel swallowed. You weren't helping. No. You were holding everything together. The admission seemed painful, like extracting a splinter that had been buried for years. I watched the sun sink lower. Neither of us looked at the other. There were so many things I never noticed. I nodded. I know. Her eyes filled slightly. Not enough for tears, just enough for honesty. I should have defended you. There it was. The sentence I had waited months to hear, maybe years. The sentence that should have been spoken the night everything broke. The sentence that should have interrupted Tyler. The sentence that should have stopped Mason's laughter. The sentence that should have mattered. But timing changes everything. A key is worthless after the door has already been kicked down. I looked toward the fading sunlight. You should have. Rachel closed her eyes. No argument, no excuse. Because there wasn't one. For the first time since that night, she simply accepted responsibility. And strangely, that hurt more than denial. Because acceptance confirmed what I had already known. She understood. Too late, but she understood. The boys reached that point eventually, too. I could see it happening. Not through grand speeches, not through emotional confrontations, through observation. Reality had become their teacher, and reality is merciless. Tyler started working additional hours, not because he wanted spending money, because he needed it. The difference mattered. The first paycheck barely covered anything. That surprised him. The second surprised him too. Taxes, insurance, gas, food. Life consumed money faster than he could earn it. I watched frustration slowly become understanding. One evening, he came home exhausted, his shirt stained, his shoulders slumped. The confidence that had once filled every room was gone. He sat at the kitchen table without speaking. Mason entered a few minutes later carrying groceries, store-brand products, discount items, the kind of purchases people make when every dollar matters. They unpacked everything in silence. Then Tyler looked at the receipt, actually looked at it, studied it. His face tightened. I knew that expression. I had worn it for years. The expression of someone realizing how expensive ordinary life really is. Not vacations, not luxuries, ordinary life, the essentials, the things people never appreciate until they start paying for them. A gallon of milk, vehicle maintenance, electricity, internet, insurance, toilet paper. Everything costs something. Someone always pays. For most of their lives, that someone had been me. Now they were finally meeting the bill. Mason changed more quietly. He began helping Rachel without being asked. Small things, laundry, yard work, errands. Nothing dramatic, nothing worthy of applause. But enough to notice. Enough to suggest that something inside him had shifted. One Saturday morning, I walked into the garage and found him organizing tools. My tools. The same tools he had ignored for years. The same tools he used to leave scattered after borrowing them. Now he was cleaning them, putting them away properly, respecting them. A tiny thing, a meaningless thing. And yet somehow it wasn't meaningless at all. Because respect rarely appears in speeches. It appears in habits, in details. in behavior, in the treatment of things that don't belong to you. He looked up when he saw me. Awkwardness immediately filled the room. We both felt it. The history between us sat there like a third person, invisible, heavy. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally spoke. I didn't realize how much stuff you did. Simple, honest, late. I nodded, nothing more. Because what response existed? Thank you? It's okay? No, neither felt true. The moment passed, he returned to organizing tools. I walked away. Some conversations don't need expansion. The hardest realization came one rainy evening in November. The four of us were sitting in the living room, a rare occurrence these days. No television, no music, just rain striking the windows. Rachel was balancing expenses. Tyler was reviewing work schedules. Mason was studying. The atmosphere felt strangely fragile, like people living among the ruins of something they once took for granted. Then Tyler asked a question, a simple question, the kind that changes everything. Mom, Rachel looked up. What? Why did he do all that? The room became still. I knew what he meant. Everyone did. Why had I spent 13 years carrying burdens that weren't technically mine? Why had I sacrificed so much? Why had I remained when leaving would have been easier? Rachel looked toward me, then back toward him. Her voice was quiet. Because he loved us. Nobody spoke. Rain tapped against the glass, steady, relentless. Tyler stared at the floor. Mason looked down at his hands. And for the first time, I saw genuine shame. Not embarrassment, not frustration, shame. The painful recognition that you've damaged something valuable. The painful recognition that someone deserved better than what you gave them. Rachel continued speaking. The truth is that your stepfather spent years making our lives easier. Her voice cracked slightly. And we got used to it. Nobody interrupted. Nobody disagreed. Because there was nothing left to argue. The evidence surrounded them, the bills, the exhaustion, the sacrifices, the consequences. Reality had already testified. Rachel wiped her eyes. He wasn't trying to replace your father. Silence. He was trying to love you. That sentence landed harder than anything else. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because truth sounds different when spoken aloud. The boys sat motionless. Neither looked at me. I wasn't sure they could. Months earlier, they had laughed. Months earlier, they had dismissed 13 years with a sentence. Months earlier, they had believed I was pretending. Now they understood. Not completely. People rarely understand completely. But enough. Enough to hurt. Enough to regret. Enough to know. The following week, Tyler knocked on my office door. That alone was unusual. He rarely entered. I looked up from my computer. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. For a moment, he looked like the frightened teenager I had met years ago. Not the young man who had laughed across a dinner table. The frightened kid. I wanted to say something. I waited. His throat moved. He swallowed, then spoke. I'm sorry. The words were genuine. I could hear it. That was the problem. Months ago, they would have been enough. Now they weren't. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I hated him. Because some damage changes the shape of a relationship permanently. Trust works like glass. You can repair it, but the cracks remain. Tyler looked terrified of my response. I understood why. Finally, I nodded. I know. His eyes lifted. Hope appeared briefly, then faded when he saw my expression. Not angry, not warm, just distant. Because distance had become my protection. The conversation ended there. No dramatic reconciliation, no embrace, no miracle. Real life rarely provides those things. The truth is that by the time the boys finally understood what they had lost, I had already stopped fighting for a place in their lives. That was the part nobody could undo. The hardest lesson wasn't financial. It wasn't about bills, or electricity, or phone plans, or subscriptions. The hardest lesson was understanding that appreciation offered after destruction is not the same as appreciation offered before it. One saves relationships. The other mourns them. Months after that dinner, the family finally understood what the man sitting at the table had been carrying. They finally understood who had been holding their world together. They finally understood that blood is not what makes someone family. Effort does. Presence does. Sacrifice does. Loyalty does. But understanding arrived after something inside me had already walked away. And once that happened, there was no road back. I still lived in the house. I still spoke politely. I still helped when necessary. But emotionally, the journey was over. The place I'd spent 13 years trying to earn was no longer a place I wanted. The fight was finished. The lesson had finally sunk in. The cost had finally been counted. And the people who once laughed when I claimed responsibility were now living with a truth they could never forget. The man they insisted was not their father had been acting like one all along. So tell me,
If you spent 13 years carrying people who refused to acknowledge the weight you bore for them, would you have stayed, or would you have walked away long before I did?